Welcome to QuestPond's YouTube channel. And what are we doing today? Today we are walking through 25 important ASP.NET MVC Core interview questions with answers and demonstrations, right? So in this coming 45 minutes, I'll be going and talking about important questions of ASP.NET MVC Core, which is around the architecture, which is around the configuration file, which is around dependency injection, which is around middleware, which is around scope, transient, singleton, Kestrel, session management techniques, right? So in this coming 45 minutes, we will run through 25 important questions, and I can guarantee you, I can guarantee that from these 25 questions, at least 5 to 6 questions are bound to be asked in any ASP.NET MVC interview, right? So let us get started. Now this is chapter 1. Please understand we have chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4. The rest of the chapters are available on questpond.com. So please do go ahead and subscribe on questpond.com to get the rest of the chapters. Now before I start, right, I want to also share a small gift with you. If you go and if you share this video on your LinkedIn or on your Facebook or on your Twitter, I will give you a ebook, an ASP.NET MVC Core interview question ebook, which covers all these 25 questions, with detailed answers. So what you can do is you can go and you can share this video, this YouTube video on your LinkedIn, on your Facebook, on your Twitter, and send us a mail at questpond@questpond.com with the link you have shared, and we will send you the ebook right away. So now before I start with all these 25 questions, right, I want you to give a bit of advice about planning the ASP.NET interview well, because this ASP.NET is a very, very big thing. It was launched in 2002, and from that point onwards, a lot of things have been changed in this, right? So for the first 1 or 2 minutes, I will talk about the basic planning, what you need to do before you start preparing for ASP.NET interviews, and then we can start off with the question, right? So let us first talk about the basic planning of ASP.NET MVC interview scope. When you talk about ASP.NET interviews, the range of questions can be very narrow or it can be very, 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 very wide. So do ensure you have proper preparation strategy at place. Remember that ASP.NET has 3 versions of framework. So ASP.NET has ASP.NET Webforms, which came in 2003, followed by ASP.NET MVC, and then followed by ASP.NET Core. So you can see this is ASP.NET Core here. Also you have ASP.NET MVC and also ASP.NET Webforms. Now, if you are a junior, if you are a fresher, I would say stick to MVC Core and say that you have just worked with MVC Core, so that you don't get into questions of Webform and MVC. But if you are a senior, you don't have too many choices. You will need to prepare right from Webforms to MVC Core, probably to MVC 5 and so on. So what I've done is I have created 3 categories of ASP.NET interviews. One which is Webforms, another one which is MVC 5, and the other one which is MVC Core. Now this tutorial is very specific and it is focused only and only on MVC Core. So ensure you have a proper strategy at place for ASP.NET. If you are putting projects which are Webform based in your resume, you would have a very, very big preparation band. If you are putting MVC Core, you have a focused preparation accordingly. So now that you have understood, how to go and manage your scope, right? So now let us go ahead and start with question number 1 from these 25 questions. What is ASP.NET MVC Core? ASP.NET MVC Core is an open source cross-platform framework to develop web applications. It is created by Microsoft. So when you develop web applications using ASP.NET Core, it can run on Windows, it can run on Linux, it can run on Mac. It's cross-platform. Remember that in this question, the interviewer would like to hear the word cross-platform very, very clearly. So try to emphasize that. What's the difference between ASP.NET MVC Core versus ASP.NET MVC, which is also known as ASP.NET MVC 5 versus the old Webforms? Now, before I answer this question, the first important thing to remember is the terminologies. So when people use these terminologies, we need to understand, what context, they are speaking about. For example, if the interviewer is saying web forms, he is talking about the old ASP.NET, which is launched in 2003. If he's saying MVC or MVC 5 without the word core, then he's talking about the second version of ASP.NET. And when he's saying MVC Core, then he's talking about the new MVC Core, which is of 2017. So when you're answering this question, you need to understand the terminologies. Web forms, the classical one, ASP.NET Web Forms, then the mid-level launch ASP.NET MVC, and then ASP.NET MVC Core, which is the current version. Now let us try to answer the question. Now you can see on the screen I have flashed like 10 to 11 points, but believe me, the interviewer will not have the patience, to go through all your raga and saga of the 10 to 11 points. So please pick up, 2 or 3 important points and try to phrase an answer before the interviewer. The first point, which I will pick up is cross-platform. When it comes to web forms and ASP.NET MVC 5, they are absolutely not cross-platform. They work only on Windows. But in case of ASP.NET MVC Core, it is cross-platform. It is open source. It can run on Linux. It can run on Mac. It can run on Windows. The second point which I will pick up is performance. ASP.NET Web Forms has the worst performance, because it has view state, it has page lifecycle, followed by ASP.NET MVC, and from all of these versions of ASP.NET, MVC Core has the best performance. Because in case of MVC Core, you don't have the page lifecycle, you don't have the view state. Also, the DLLs, the components are very miniature in nature. So if you look at ASP.NET MVC 5, if you have a DLL of size, let us say 10 KB, they are broken down 10 KB again into small 1 KB pieces in MVC Core. So because of that, the memory footprint is less, and that makes your application faster, right? So when it comes to performance, ASP.NET MVC Core has the best performance from the past 2 versions of ASP.NET. The third point is simplification. When it comes to web forms, it is quite complicated. We have to learn the page lifecycle, we have to learn the view state, we have to learn the server controls, so many things out there, right? But when it comes to MVC 5, it is mediumly complicated. In other words, as compared to web forms, you don't have to learn those page life cycles and, view state and so on. When it comes to MVC Core, it is very simplified. For example, in ASP.NET MVC 5, you have a complicated web config file. But in case of MVC Core, you have a very simple app settings file, right? In case of MVC 5, you do not have dependency injection. So you have to write a lot of code. You have to bring in a third party to do DI. But in case of MVC Core, we have a ready-made dependency injection. So when it comes to simplification of development, ASP.NET MVC Core stands at the top. And if the interviewer is still not losing patience, right, I can talk about the third point, which is cloud ready. So everybody is trying to move to cloud. Now, when web forms was there, cloud was not really present at that time. It was not having, such a big presence, right? So that's why web forms is not really meant for cloud. You can host it, but it is not meant for cloud. ASP.NET MVC 5, you can host on cloud, you can manage a lot of things, but not like MVC Core. MVC Core, it is small, it is lightweight, it can go inside a Docker. The settings are so simplified, it is cross-platform. So the cloud readiness of ASP.NET MVC Core, is very much more prepared as compared to web forms and MVC 5. Now you can see there are more other points which I will not go through it, but remember that the interviewer can ask you, like for example, the interviewer can ask you saying that, hey, when it comes to dependency injection, what do you think? So for example, for dependency injection, ASP.NET Core has a built-in mechanism, but in case of web forms and MVC 5, we need to use third party. Or, they can ask you what about the HTML control, how much control we have on HTML. So when it comes to web forms, you have a less control, because there is code behind, there is this ASPX. But when it comes to MVC 5 and MVC Core, we have the Razor View engine, which gives you awesome control on HTML and the flexibility. So the other points, probably you can wait for the interviewer to ask rather than you telling it, right? So 4 points, which I have spoken now: cross-platform, performance, simplification, and cloud ready. Explain MVC architecture. MVC is an architecture pattern wherein we divide the project into 3 layers: controllers, models, and views. The model layer has the business logic. So normally when you look at the model layer, it will have your domain like customer class or supplier class or accounts and inventory and payroll. So it will normally have your domain classes and the business logic. The views is where you have your UI. So for example, your HTML, your colors, your CSS, that all comes into the views. And controller connects the model and the view. So if you look at the controller is a binding layer. It binds the model and the view. For example, you can see out here, it is loading the customer model and then passing it to the view, right? So in MVC architecture, we divide our project into 3 layers. One is controllers, models, and views. The view is for look and feel, model has the business logic, and controller binds the model and the view. Explain the importance of wwwroot folder. wwwroot folder is a very special folder in the MVC Core project wherein we can go and we can store static content. Static content means content like CSS, content like HTML, JavaScript, images. So in wwwroot, we store static contents. What's the importance of appsettings.json? Appsettings.json helps us to store configuration data or configuration of the project. For example, connection strings or version numbers and so on. So appsettings.json is a very simple file which is in JSON format. JSON format means name and value. So name and value. So as compared to our previous web.config file which we had in MVC5 and in web form, appsettings.json is a pretty simple file in a simple JSON format with a name and a value pair, and it is specially used to store configuration data of your project. How to read configurations from appsettings.json. So you can see here, this is the appsettings.json file, and let us say you want to read this connection string or the admin string or the version number. So how does it work? In order to go and read the appsettings.json, we need to use something called as the iConfiguration interface. This iConfiguration interface belongs to the Microsoft.extensions.configuration namespace. So what we need to do is wherever we need to read the configuration, we need to go and provide this iConfiguration in the constructor. So in the constructor, we provide the iConfiguration as a parameter, as you can see on the screen. And this iConfiguration then is dependency injected, means a ready-made object is injected by the MVC core out here. And then you can go and you can say, I want to read the connection string. For example, you can see here we have this const string, and you have to go and say configuration square bracket const string, and then it will go and it will read this connection string out here, right? So to read the appsetting.json file, we need to go and provide the iConfiguration object in the constructor, and then we can say configuration square bracket const string. In case your parameter is a multi-level JSON. For example, you can see this const string was the direct value, but let us say now you have environment, and then in that you have production and test. Then what you have to do is you have to say here environment : production, environment : test, right? So you need to go and say environment : production or environment : test. So to read appsetting.json file, we need to provide the iConfiguration in the constructor of the controller. Explain dependency injection. Any MVC core interview will never be complete if this question is not asked, right? Now, dependency injection concept is very easy to understand. It is very easy to implement, but it is very difficult to communicate in simple English grammar to anyone, right? So I would suggest please practice, come out with important points, and see that you can make the interviewer's life easy to understand this concept. But here goes the answer. Dependency injection is a practice. Dependency injection is a practice of providing dependent objects for a class from outside rather than the class creating the dependent objects. In other words, you can see here, this is the customer API controller. Now this customer API controller wants this customer DB context object. So rather than he creating it from here, you provide it from outside via the constructor or probably via a property. So dependency injection is a practice wherein the dependent objects of a class is injected from outside through a constructor or through a property, right? Rather than the caller himself creating it. Now the next question comes up is that what is the benefit of doing dependency injection? What is the benefit of moving this object creation process outside the caller, right? Now think about it. Let us say if you have a new version of customer DB context. So let's say you have a new version called as customer DB context new version. Now think about it. How many places you have to make the change? You have to make the change here. Then you have to make the change here. Then you have to go and make the change here. And you have to make the changes in so many controllers, right? So the problem with putting the new keyword or putting the object creation inside the caller or giving the job of object creation to the caller is that we become a tightly coupled system. But now if I say no, like I don't worry about what kind of objects will come in. It's possible you can give me customer DB context version 1, version 2, right? You just say inject it out here. So by doing dependency injection, we have a more decoupled system. So rather than the caller creating the object, now we are saying that the caller says, I don't worry about from where this object comes, what kind of version comes in. You just inject me out here and I will use it accordingly. So by implementing dependency injection, you create a more decoupled system. This is a very important point which the interviewer wants to hear from you. He wants to hear that by doing dependency injection, you have a better architecture because you change at one place now. So somewhere at one place, we will change this and automatically everybody will get customer DB context version 1 or customer DB context version 2. Now, surely the next level of question comes around dependency injection is that how do you implement it? So remember that in the interview, this dependency injection question will come in 3 levels probably. First, what is dependency injection? Second, why do we need dependency injection, which we just answered previously? And third one, how to implement it, right? So to implement dependency injection, we need to go and provide the dependency objects in the startup.cs file in the configure services method. I repeat this. In the startup.cs file in the configure services method, we can go and we can specify the dependencies. For example, here we have to say services.add scoped. Right now we will come to what is add scoped later on, right? So you can use add scoped, you can use add singleton, you can use add transient. So there are 3 ways of doing dependency injection. We will speak about it later on. So you can go and you can say here add scoped. So what do you want to dependency inject? I want to inject, let us say, customer DB context. So for now, if anyone out there who will ask for customer DB context will get this instance. So for example, now this customer API controller is asking for customer DB context. He will get the instance of customer DB context. But now let us say tomorrow a new version comes in. Right? So let us say we have a new version called as customer DB context new version. Then we will go and we will say here, okay, now we have a new version, a new implementation. So we'll just go and change at this location only. At this point we change, we say that, okay, for anyone who is asking for customer DB context, inject customer DB context new version. Now look at this. From one single point I'm changing here and all across the place now, it will inject the new version, right? So to implement dependency injection, we need to go and provide the dependent objects in the configure services method by using add scoped or by using add singleton or by using add transient. We'll come to the differences of the dependency injection styles later on. Explain the need of middleware in MVC Core, or what is the use of middleware in MVC. So middleware is nothing but it helps to execute pre-processing logic in MVC architecture. Means, for example, when you look at your MVC process flow, it is something like this. The end user, whenever he sends any request to an MVC website, it first hits the controller. The controller then takes the data from the model. So this is step 1. Afterwards, the controller takes the data from the model, and this data he applies it to the view, and that is sent as a HTML to the browser, right? So this is how the flow is. Now, if you want to go and insert some pre-processing logic, so before even the request hits the controller, if you want to go and put some pre-processing logic, that's where middleware comes into picture. So middleware comes into picture in the request pipeline before the request hits the controller. So this is the middleware, right? So again, I repeat, middleware is nothing but it helps you to execute pre-processing logic before the request hits the controller. I repeat the answer. Middleware helps to insert pre-processing logic before the request hits to the controller. How do we implement middleware in MVC Core, right? So to implement middleware, we first need to go and we need to add. So the first step is we need to go ahead and we need to add the middleware by using the middleware template. So you can see here on the project, I have right clicked and I've said add new item, and we will first go ahead here and add this middleware class, right? So you can see here I'm adding a middleware class here. Let us say custom authentication. Normally middleware will be used for authentication or authorization, right? So custom authentication. So now you can see in this middleware class, we have a method called as invoke. So in this invoke, you can go and you can write your pre-processing logic. So whatever pre-processing logic you want to write, you will write it into this invoke method. And to put this middleware into your pipeline, we need to go and in the configure method. So in the startup.cs file, in the configure method, we need to go and we need to say here app.use middleware. So what middleware do you want to use? I want to use the custom authentication, right? So it's a 3-step process. First, you need to go and you need to add the class, right? Add the middleware class by using the template. Second, write your custom logic in the invoke method. So there is an invoke method. So this is step 2. Write the logic in the invoke method. And then in the configure method, we need to go and we need to plug the middleware into the pipeline. So by using the app.use middleware syntax, we need to go and we need to plug the middleware into the pipeline. So 3 steps. Add the template, write your custom logic into the invoke method, and then plug it into the pipeline by using app.use middleware. What is the need of startup.cs file? So you can see that in our MVC Core project, we have this startup.cs file. So what is the use of it? Now remember that this question can also be asked in a tweaked way, in a twisted way. What is the importance of configure services and configure method? Or else, the interviewer can also ask that what is the difference between configure and configure services, right? So all these 3 questions are completely related, right? So let us try to answer them. So startup.cs file helps us to do 2 things. It helps us to configure our dependency injection objects, and it helps us to configure our middleware. So this configure services method, so if you see here, this startup.cs file has 2 methods, configure services and configure. So this configure services method helps to configure our dependency injection objects. The configure method helps to configure middleware. So for example, now in my home controller, I'm injecting the customer objects here in the constructor. So this injection of the customer objects we define here. So in the configure services, you will see that I've written here services.add scoped. Wherever there is customer, inject customer discounted, right? So in the configure services, you will define your dependency injection. So you can see here in the configure services, We have services.add, services.add, services.add. So all this is dependency injection, right? In the configure method, we define our middleware. Remember, we said that before this question, there was this middleware question where we said middleware helps us to execute pre-processing logic. So you can see here I'm saying that in the middleware, execute the log request, middleware, execute check security. So configure services helps to configure dependency injection, while configure helps us to configure middleware. In configure services, you'll always see these methods like services.add, services.add. While in configure, you will see app.use middleware, app.use session, right? So this configures the middleware, the pipeline, in the pipeline, which objects have to be executed, and configure services for dependency injection. What are the various ways of doing dependency injection in MVC Core? Now there are three ways of doing dependency injection in MVC Core. The first one is add scoped. The second one is add singleton, and the third one is add transient. Now the interviewer can also ask you this question in a tweaked manner. He can ask you that what is the difference between transient versus scoped versus singleton. So he can ask you that what are the various ways of doing dependency injection, or he can ask you to differentiate between the various ways of dependency injection. So let us get started with what exactly is add scoped. Add scoped instantiates object per request. So what does it mean? Now, for example, you can see that we have a home controller here, and in this home controller, let us say we want to dependency inject customer object 2 times. So you can see here this is obj and this is obj1. And assume that in your code, in your services.configure services method, already this add scoped is written like this: inject customer object, right? So now what will happen in this case? So now you have said add scoped. In case of add scoped now, so let us say you have a user here. The user sends the first request, let us say. So he sends the first request. Assume this is request 1, right? So this is request 1, right? Remember, in MVC, the first hit comes to the controller, right? So he sends a request. So he will instantiate an object of customer. Let's assume that this is instance 1. And to both of these dependency injection object, he will inject the same instance. I repeat this. In this one request, he will instantiate the customer object only once, and the same instance will be injected in both of these dependency injection objects, right? Now let us say he sends request 2. Now for request 2, a new instance of the customer object will be created. We can name this as instance 2, but the same instance will be injected again in that request. So add scoped instantiates object per request. So for every request, a single instance is created, a fresh instance is created, and the same instance is injected again and again for every dependency injection object in the constructor. Now let's talk about add transient. Add transient creates fresh instances for every dependency injected object. I repeat this. Add transient injects new instances for every dependency injection object. So here you can see we have 2 dependency injection objects. One is obj1, another one is obj, right? Obj and obj1. So let us say now the user sends a request 1. So what he will do now is he will create 2 instances. He will create instance 1, inject it to obj. He will create one more instance 1, new one, instance 2, and inject it to obj1. In the same way, if you send a second request, right, again 2 instances will be created. Instance, you can say 3, and you can say instance 4, right, and they will be injected to these dependency injection objects. So what I mean is that in transient, you will find that fresh instances objects will be injected for every dependency injection in the constructor. In case of add singleton, only one big singleton object is created for the whole application. So for the whole application life cycle, only one global instance is created. right? Global instance. So there will be one big global instance of customer. So you send request 1, the same instance is injected. The same instance is injected. You say request 2, the same instance is injected. The same instance is injected. If there is any other customer out there, let us say there is some other customer out here. Let's say this is customer 1 who is surfing from the browser. Let us say there is user 2 who is surfing. If he also sends multiple request 1, request 2, the same instance will be created. So singleton is like a global object. The same instance is shared across all the dependency injection objects. Explain what is Razor. Razor is nothing but it is a view engine. It is a markup syntax which helps us to write HTML and server-side code using C# or VB.NET. So it helps us to write server-side code and HTML in web pages, right? So for example, here you can see I can mix up HTML and C# code by using Razor. So the Razor syntax starts with @ with a curly bracket start and curly bracket end, and then I can go and I can write C# syntaxes out here, right? Like this. If I want to display date and time, I can do this, date and time dot now. If I want to go and write some code, I can write but the code with the @ curly bracket start and curly bracket end. So a Razor view is nothing but it helps us to mix HTML and Razor code inside the view. It's a view engine. How can we pass model object to a view? In order to pass a model object to a view, we can say here return view, the syntax, return view, the view name, and the second parameter is the object name. So you can see that we have a simple search action here where we are passing the customer name. It is making a link queue query to the database, getting the customer collection, and then this customer collection here is passed to this view. So to pass a model object to a view, we have to say return view, the view name, comma, the model name. What are strongly typed views? Strongly typed views are those views wherein we get the IntelliSense for the model. Means, for example, at this moment we are using this customer collection out here, and if I do a dot here, you can see that I can get IntelliSense. So I understand here that this customer has a customer name property where the N is capital, it has address, it has ID, it has products, and so on. So we get IntelliSense inside our Razor view. So such kind of a view are termed as strongly typed view. And to create a strongly typed view, you have to say at the top @model and then the type. For example, here we are saying that the model object here is a type of list customer. Now, if this code is not here, if this @model syntax is not here, then this is no more a strongly typed view. I have to go and type it myself, customer and name N capital. Now I can make a mistake here, right? NAME, I can type here small. So that's why strongly typed views helps you with IntelliSense, and that helps you to avoid any kind of errors during runtime. So strongly typed views help you to give IntelliSense for the model used inside the view. What exactly is a view model? A view model is nothing but the data what your view needs. For example, now let us say you have a view which displays the customer and the products of that customer, right? So you want to go and display the customer model as well as you want to go and display list of products. Now what happens is in a view, for example, in any view, you can go and you can use only one model. For example, you can see here list of customer, you can do this, but you can't go and say also use products. You can't use two models at the same time in a Razor view. You can see it is giving me an exception. So what we do, we create a view model. We create a wrapper class. So we say that you can see I'm creating a customer view model here, which is having a customer object as well as the products object. So a view model is nothing but a wrapper class which is wrapped around multiple models, and this view model is nothing but it represents the data what your view needs. So a view model is a wrapper class over multiple models, and it represents the data what your view needs. What exactly is Kestrel Web Server? Kestrel Web Server is a free open source web server which ships with ASP.NET Core. So when you create an ASP.NET Core application, Kestrel is a default web server. So you can see here, I'm running Kestrel at the background. So this is Kestrel, which is listening to localhost 5000. And whenever I send a request out here, it is served by Kestrel. So this is my ASP.NET Core application. So what happens is Kestrel is a default web server. So any request, which is sent to MVC first goes to Kestrel. Kestrel then goes and loads your controllers, your views and models, and then sends a response back to the browser. So Kestrel is a free, open source, lightweight, default web server of ASP.NET Core, which ships with ASP.NET Core setup. Now the next question the interviewer will surely ask is, why didn't Microsoft choose IIS, that is Internet Information Server, as a default server for ASP.NET Core, and why did they create a new server like Kestrel? Now remember that the ASP.NET Core is supposed to run cross-platform. I repeat this sentence. ASP.NET Core is supposed to run cross-platform, while Internet Information Server, that is IIS web server, runs only on Windows. So definitely if you make IIS as a part of ASP.NET Core, it's not going to work. So that's why IIS is not the default web server of Kestrel. Now the next question the interviewer will surely ask you is that, does Kestrel replace IIS? And the answer is no. See, web servers like IIS or Apache and Tomcat or Nginx, these web servers are very old. They are time tested in terms of performance, in terms of security. So Kestrel cannot directly be a public facing web server. Kestrel is very specific to MVC. It understands the MVC Core architecture well. It understands the MVC Core ASP.NET components very well, right? So normally what happens in production is you use the reverse proxy architecture. You use the reverse proxy architecture and you use both IIS and Kestrel together. So in production, nobody just uses Kestrel. They use the combination of IIS plus Kestrel or Apache plus Kestrel or Nginx plus Kestrel. And how do they make it work? By using the reverse proxy architecture. So in reverse proxy architecture, what happens is when any end user sends a request, the request will go to a strong time tested server like IIS or to Apache and so on. And then this strong time tested server will forward the request to Kestrel, and Kestrel will then forward the request to your MVC. It will create the instance of the controller, do the view, the model, take the response back and forward it back to your IIS web server. This is termed as a reverse proxy architecture, wherein your Kestrel is acting like a mediator, right? So remember that Kestrel ships with ASP.NET. It is a part of the ASP.NET Core setup. It is a default web server, right? It is an in-process server. You cannot run MVC directly inside IIS or Apache. So the first request comes to IIS, IIS forwards it to Kestrel, Kestrel forwards it to MVC and the response back. This is termed as a reverse proxy architecture. So remember that the interviewer wants to hear from you that in production, you are using both of them. You are using a strong front-end server like IIS, Apache or Nginx, and also Kestrel is by default running inside the ASP.NET Core process. What are cookies? Cookies are text files with small pieces of data which is stored in the end user's computer regarding the website. So for example, the website can store information inside the cookie file like what are your likings, what are you surfing, must be some kind of a state management also they can store, right? So if you see, this is my ASP.NET Core application running, and if you go and if you say inspect, you can see cookies right out here. So you can see Cookies are small text file. So here you can see there is a cookie here called as ASP.NET Core here, which is probably storing some kind of a session information. So cookies are text files which store information regarding the user about the website. What is this term called as session management, and why do we need session management in ASP.NET? HTTP is a stateless protocol. So HTTP is stateless. So in other words, what happens is, so here is your MVC application running. So the end user sends a request. Let's say this is request 1. MVC serves that request, gives back a response. After that, the MVC server forgets everything about the user. So let us say if the user comes next time, if the same user comes next time, he treats this as a new user. He has no idea what this user did in request 1 and what he responded in the response 1, right? So in this request 2, for MVC, this is a fresh new user. So that means that the state is not maintained between the request. Every request is like an individual standalone request and response. So if you want to go and maintain states between these requests, if you want to go and say, oh, like I want him to remember the username, I want him to remember what the user did in the previous request, then you need to implement proper session management. So again, I repeat, what is session management? Session management is nothing but, wherein we want to maintain states between the requests. By default, HTTP is a stateless protocol, so the states are not maintained between the requests. In order to maintain states, we use session management techniques of MVC. So what are the various ways of doing session management in ASP.NET? So there are many ways of doing session management, and every way or every method has its own significance and importance and should be used accordingly. So the first way, which is the most preferred way of doing session management, is by using the session variable. So in the HTTP context, there is a session variable, and you can use this session variable to set and get data, right? Second way of doing session management by using something called as view data, right? Third way of doing session management is by using something called as temp data. We also have something called as view bag. So there are basically three ways of doing session management. One is session variables, view data / view bag. Both the methods view bag and view data are one and the same. We will come to the differences later on in the coming questions. And the last one is using temp data. So remember, three ways of doing session management in ASP.NET: session, view data / view bag, and temp data. So a great congratulations to you and also to me. We have covered 25 important questions of ASP.NET MVC interview. So this was chapter 1, right? Now in chapter 2, what we will do is we will look into the difference between the various ways of doing session management. So in this chapter 1, in question number 25, I talked about, what are the various ways of doing session management, like view data, temp data, session variables, right? But, when it comes to MVC interviews, they will also ask you in what scenarios, we should use what, when you should use what is better and what is not better under certain scenarios. So chapter 2, I'm completely dedicating to session management of ASP.NET Core. After that, chapter 3, I will talk about web API. Remember that any MVC interview, ASP.NET MVC interview, cannot be complete without a question on web API. So in chapter 3, I will talk about web API. In chapter 4, I will talk about security using JWT token, right? So I have planned many chapters, after this. So for the rest of the chapters, please go and subscribe to questpond.com. So this was chapter 1. I hope you have enjoyed it. And again, if you really like, my tuitions out here, if you really like this chapter 1, what you can do is you can go to facebook.com/questpond, and you can go and you can put a feedback out there saying that how much you like this lessons, right? And second, if you want to get the free ebook of ASP.NET MVC Core interviews, which I have written, what you can do is you can go and you can share this video on your Facebook, on your Twitter, or on your LinkedIn. And you can send us a mail at questpond@questpond.com, and we will see that you get this free ebook, right? So thank you very much. Happy learning, be billable, and happy job hunting. Thank you.